So this guy stole $18 million worth of maple syrup and nearly collapsed an entire industry. I know what you're thinking. Who the hell steals maple syrup, right? Well, the guy's name is Richard Vallières. Richard's 34 years old, living in Quebec, and he's basically a maple syrup dealer. But here's the thing about Richard. He's got this problem with authority. Like, he really doesn't like being told what to do. And in Quebec's maple syrup world, that's a problem because literally everything is controlled. Quebec controls like 75% of the world's maple syrup supply through this organization called the Federation of Quebec Maple Syrup Producers. And they run it like the mafia. The Federation has this thing called the Global Strategic Maple Syrup Reserve. I'm not kidding. It's like an oil reserve, but for pancake topping. They've got millions of pounds of syrup stored in white barrels stacked up in warehouses across Quebec. And get this, barrel for barrel, maple syrup is worth more than crude oil. We're talking liquid gold here. But Richard's got a problem. He wants to sell syrup, but the Federation controls everything. Quotas, prices, who can sell what and where. It's like trying to sell drugs when the government runs the cartel. So Richard's been looking for ways to get around their system. Now, I'm not saying Richard's the smartest criminal mastermind you've ever heard of. I mean, spoiler alert, he's definitely not. But what he lacks in brains, he makes up for in pure audacity. So one day in early 2011, Richard's at a maple syrup industry meeting, and he's complaining to anyone who'll listen about the Federation's stranglehold. And that's when this guy slides up to him, Avik Karen. And Avik's got this look in his eye like he's been waiting his whole life for someone to say exactly what Richard just said. And here's where it gets interesting. Avik's spouse owns a warehouse that the Federation rents to store their strategic reserve. But here's what makes this even crazier. Avik's been watching these Federation guys treat his property like they own it for years. They're rude to his spouse. They act like they're doing him a favor by paying rent. And Avik's been fantasizing about screwing them over since day one. So when Richard comes to him with this crazy idea, Avik's like, alright, in August 2011, they start their operation. And this is not a smash and grab situation. This is a long-term heist that goes on for almost an entire year. They're going to the warehouse, siphoning syrup out of the barrels and replacing it with water. Barrel by barrel, week after week. Now, each barrel weighs about 600 pounds when it's full of syrup, so they can't just roll these things out the front door. Instead, they're bringing in pumps and hoses, sucking the syrup out, transferring it to other containers, and then filling the original barrels with plain water so nobody notices the weight difference. And guess what happens next? They're making bank. Richard's selling this stolen syrup to black market dealers like it's going out of style. There's this guy in New Brunswick who's buying hundreds of barrels from them. Bro's been in the syrup game forever, operating outside the Federation system. He's basically the perfect middleman for their operation. They've also got Richard's dad helping out, storing stolen syrup at his place. Plus, they've hired a trucker who's driving loads of stolen syrup all over Canada at night, taking back roads to avoid attention. Yeah, Richard's got a whole criminal enterprise going. By the end of their operation, they stole about 9,500 barrels total. That's 2.7 million kilograms of syrup worth 18 million Canadian dollars. To put that in perspective, that's enough syrup to top 183 million pancakes or fill 1.5 Olympic swimming pools with syrup. The Federation has no idea what's happening because nobody's checking the reserve during maple syrup season in the spring. The barrels all look the same from the outside. They weigh about the same because of the water, and there's minimal security. Richard and his crew are literally getting away with the stickiest crime in Canadian history. Now, for almost a year, Richard thinks he's the smartest guy in Quebec. He's literally swimming in stolen syrup money, probably buying rounds at the local bar, feeling like a criminal mastermind, until July 2012, when one clumsy inspector basically destroys his entire life in about 30 seconds. The Federation sends an inspector to do their annual inventory of the strategic reserve. The inspector climbs up on a stack of barrels to check the top ones, and suddenly one shifts under his weight. He almost falls off because the barrel that should be full and heavy is actually light as a feather. And that's when he notices something else. Some of the barrels are starting to rust. Now, maple syrup doesn't make barrels rust, but water sure does. So the inspector's like, what the is going on here? He opens up the barrel and finds it's completely empty. Then he checks another one, water, another one, more water. And that's when he realizes they've been robbed blind. The Federation immediately calls the cops and boom, suddenly there's a massive investigation. We're talking Quebec Provincial Police, the RCMP, Canada Border Services, even U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement because some of the syrup crossed international borders. Over 300 people in the maple syrup industry get interviewed. The police start tracing where all this stolen syrup went, and they discover Richard's been selling it all over North America. They find hundreds of barrels at the New Brunswick dealer's facility. They're tracking shipments to Ontario, the northern U.S., even overseas. And that's when things really start to go south for Richard and his crew.
Quebec police have been busy this week making arrests in a theft that has made international headlines because the crime was so unique. $18 million worth of maple syrup was stolen from a storage warehouse.
In December 2012, the cops make their move. 3 days of coordinated arrests across multiple provinces. They grab Richard Avick, the New Brunswick dealer, Richard's dad, and a bunch of other people. They seize trucks, forklifts, scales, all the equipment used to move the syrup around. And then the real drama starts in court. Richard tries to claim he was forced to do it at gunpoint by some mysterious partner who threatened his family. The jury's like, yeah, right, bro. Avick pleads guilty, but then has a complete meltdown at sentencing, shouting at the judge and pounding on the prisoner's box like a lunatic. So in 2016, they all get convicted. Richard gets hit the hardest, 8 years in prison, plus a $9.4 million fine. I'm not kidding, $9.4 million? The judge is basically like, crime shouldn't pay, so you owe us the entire value of the syrup that wasn't recovered. Avick gets 5 years plus over $1 million in fines. The New Brunswick dealer gets house arrest plus hefty fines. Even Richard's dad gets community service and has to pay thousands. But here's where it gets really messed up. Richard appeals the fine all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. His lawyers argue he should only pay his personal profit, which was about $1 million, not the entire value of the stolen syrup. But in March 2022, the Supreme Court unanimously says, nope, you owe the full amount. And if Richard can't pay it within 10 years, 6 more years in prison. So this dude could end up serving 14 years total for stealing pancake syrup. Meanwhile, the Federation learned their lesson. They built this new fortress warehouse that's basically the Fort Knox of maple syrup. 24/7 surveillance, controlled access, the whole 9 yards. They even give tours now where they brag about how secure it is. So Richard's probably still in prison right now, lying on his bunk, all because he couldn't handle being told what to do by the maple syrup mafia. I mean, the dude went from selling pancake topping to owing $10 million to the Canadian government. That is wild.